And now for a completely self-indulgent video. You know, um, a couple weeks ago, I made some video where I think I showed a Guns N' Roses comic here somewhere. I think it was this one, and I think Mercy's little show comment made some comments like I think she'd be interested in the video. I could be wrong. And then I had two other messages kind of saying the same thing come in a couple days later apart. And the thing about it is, if there's anything that I've really been into longer than comics, it's been music. And I, I mean, I can go far back with music as I can with the comics and all this stuff and everything like that. But the music was there first. There's no doubt about it in my mind. Um, Now, as far as me, like I said, this is when we want to self-indulgent things and stuff like that. The soundtrack of our lives is whatever comes through that radio, whatever we're playing in our car, whatever we're playing in our room, whatever we're finding on TV. I've talked about how these comics kind of take me back, and I can tell you what was going on around me in my life when I bought a lot of these comics and stuff. And I think if there's anything that almost everybody probably has in common is that music will do the same thing. It will take them back. Um, so, I think as a kid, my mom told me this story about when I was like about 2 or 3 or something like that. We were across the street in the high school at the high school in Russell County, Virginia, and they were having some kind of summer festival going on, and they had a band playing, and the band started playing House of the Rising Sun, and Mom wanted to go, and all I did was jump out there. I got my platinum blonde hair in the Prince Valiant cut, whatever they called it back then, and then I'm wearing a pair of overalls, no shirt, and I'm sure I had some kind of shoes on. And I got there and I danced, and apparently they let me get on stage and dance. And as soon as the song was over, I looked at my mom and I'm like, "Okay, mommy, we can go home now." I just heard that story a few years ago. And then like when the stepdad popped up and we were all living together, my bedtime was 9, but I'm supposed to go to bed while he's got Creedence Clearwater, Led Zeppelin, Kiss. I'm sure there's some Deep Purple in there or something like that playing, blasting through the house. Probably on an 8-track back then. I remember a huge record collection. And right there in his room, he had a spinner rack in his bedroom. I was with him when he found it behind this Match Mart where they just literally tossed it out beside the dumpster. And in the center of this room is this spinner rack full of Silver Age comic books, X-Men, Fantastic Four, and stuff like that. And all around the room, he had plastered Kiss posters, you know. So, it all tied together. And right beside that spinner rack was, records and milk crates and stuff, and, one of those old 70s stereos. And so at this time and stuff like that, one of the first comics that I remember seeing that had anything to do with, I don't even have the page anymore, man, but it's Disintegrated, man. I had the Kiss Marvel's Spectacular Special or something that they actually drew blood and put it in the ink or something, right? So I carried that around, and it's here somewhere floating around. I thought I'd pulled it out, but basically they reprinted it with the Kiss classics here. I say a couple years ago, man, but for all I know, this was back in the 90s. Yeah, 1977 is when it came out. 1978 is when the second one came out, and 1995 is when they came out with this. And Gene Simmons as a rock star. There's an old joke that all rock stars want to be actors and all actors want to be rock stars. If you just plow through some movies and stuff, man, you'll find people like Kevin Bacon and what was her name, Gina Gershon. They're in bands, and stuff like that. And then you had Gene Simmons and Mick Jagger making movies back in the 80s and stuff like that. So it's not uncommon. And then but this, when that first Kiss Spectacular came out, and it's a coveted book still to this day and stuff, man. It's recolored in this, man. But you had like, I think Steve Gerber came in writing it, and you had people like Al Weiss and John Buscema coming in there, Sal Buscema and a bunch of them coming in, and it was an event. And this actually came from, let me find it, Howard the Duck. Now before this, man, I know you had the Beatles popping up. This is no way a complete history. This is just something I dug through my collection to see what I had. But before that, I know the Beatles popped up in like Not Brand X and stuff, and Beatlemania was going on in the 60s, and I'm sure there's other things referenced. But on the other side of that, listened to the radio and stuff growing up and those oldie stations and stuff, I'll never forget hearing Donovan singing Sunshine Superman. Now, hearing somebody mention Superman didn't really, blow my mind, but it's when he said Green Lantern in that song that got me. Uh, just a couple years ago, Rick Springfield, I found out that he had an album around '73 come out in Australia, and I think he had a song on it called Comic Book Superhero or something like that. And it's a great song. This is before Jesse's Girl and before General Hospitals and stuff, man. He had a whole album, more or less, album covers dedicated to being a comic book thing in the '70s and stuff, right? But anyway, the Kiss thing came, everybody got all excited for him. Howard the Duck 12 and 13, again by Steve Gerber. Gene Colan did the art in this, and then like number 12, I think they're in the last panel, and in number 13, they're only on there for 2-3 pages and stuff. So Kiss to me has always been the band that had the strongest comic book ties. I mean, they came out with 2 specials. They even referenced the Beatles in the second one that a lot of people don't talk about. They actually had the character Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds in it. They were fighting Doctor Doom, and the Avengers and the Defenders were in there, and Doctor Doom was still a badass, and you had Gene Simmons fighting Mephisto in it, so all that's really cool, and like I said, in the original magazine that came out, they had a spread inside showing each member sitting there getting blood taken. That was, and a vial of blood was going to be put into the ink, and years later, Revolutionary Comics came out, is what they were called. And a lot of people were cool with it. You really need to look up Revolutionary Comics, I say on Wikipedia or something. It's a history of comics that was real. I hate to say that it's a blip in the radar, but what's important about it is that it actually went to court, and the First Amendment, protected it in court. That's why they won. New Kids on the Block sued them, for doing biographies and stuff. But like when Gene Simmons saw this, number 9 of Revolutionary Comics, these were unauthorized biographies of bands that came out, right? I mean, every month you had a different one coming out. And this is like from 89 maybe to 94 or something. The guy who did this ended up getting killed or died or something. I don't know. But anyway, Guns N' Roses threatened to sue him. But when he came to Kiss and Frank Zappa, they were all for it. All Kiss did was just buy the artwork and I think some of the rights, and they started selling them at their comics and stuff. Some people were cool about it. But that's the thing about Gene Simmons, man. He's a comic book fan. He got his look. Like, I remember seeing him raise his arms, and he had the leather, I guess, bat wings, because he was the demon. And he got that from Jack Kirby, from Black Bolt. My mind always went to Black Bolt and Spider-Man when he first came out. Steve Ditko drew the webbing under his armpits and stuff, right? So, yeah, there you go. To me, Kiss is, a huge ties to the comic book things. Gene Simmons, and Paul Stanley, before they were famous, and they were still, living in New York and stuff, Gene Simmons would put up flyers and maybe ads in newspapers or something, and said, "We'll buy comics, $1 per pound." And Paul Stanley would drive Gene around while he would go to these people's houses and apartments or whatever, and they would come out and they would hand him the books, and he'd try to give them $1, and half the time they were like, "No, just get them out of there," because comics were garbage. So Gene Simmons has a huge comic book collection, which just amazed me and stuff, right? But anyway, back to the rock and roll comics, since I pulled that out. Like I said, this is not going to have any rhyme or reason, completely self-indulgent, man. But like Marvel Comics presents Alice Cooper again, bands that were playing during my childhood and stuff. Came out with this, one-shot special here of Alice Cooper. It says Alice's first comic book appearance, but they didn't fool me. That number 1 was trying to make you think it was a first issue appearance. And he had he'd gotten locked up for alcoholism, and back then they didn't really have rehab centers, I guess, the way they do now. So you actually got locked up in an asylum and exposed to criminally insane people. You just never knew. You never knew who you want to be around. So he came out with an album called, Looking Out from the Inside or something like that. But anyway, I think this is kind of, this is based on some of the characters he wrote in his songs for that album. About the people he met in the asylum and stuff, right? Years later, Neil Gaiman would write the Alice Cooper story in a 3-issue special with Mike Zulli, Z-U-L-L-I, I think it was a 3-part prestige format. I looked at it and I was not really impressed, but I'm willing to take a look at it again and stuff, right? But anyway, this was the first one I got because I was a huge Guns N' Roses nut. As far as my love of music goes, I think it's very ironic that, like, you know, I loved all sorts of music and eclectic music and older music, yet when my teen years came and it was time for me to be part of that culture, you know, because what's great about music is that it's kind of used to make a culture. In the 60s it was big time counterculture, in the 50s it was rebellious, you know, in the 70s it was kind of like a hangover thing, a little bit lost, dance, fun, and all that stuff. Then you got the 80s where I was in the era of the power ballads, you know, and then you had your Metallica and your Anthrax and a lot of that stuff, and then you know, Guns N' Roses came out, and I'm like, oh, this is the real deal. When I heard my dad hate them, my stepdad hate them, I was like, yes, you know. So the rebellion was back, and they were dangerous, and they came out with this. You know, that's the #1 first print and all that stuff, right? And then, you know, I always had my hand. I didn't know what punk was, but I always would listen to this music and want something more from it. And I could never put my finger on what it was, right? And that goes back to being a kid and having comics and music all around, right? I watched the same two movies that are polar opposites in the same year, right? The Muppet movie, right? Here's the record. The Rainbow Connection has stayed with me forever. You know what I mean? You'd watch the Muppet Show and you would hear Floyd sitting there singing Blackbird by the Beatles. Jim Croce, Time in a Bottle, would be a skit with a very powerful message in it and stuff, and then they just have fun and everything like that. Get exposed to a lot of music. But at the same year, but in the Muppet movie, Mel Brooks said the word lobotomy. They were trying to give Kermit a lobotomy. So I'm watching this on TV. This actually got pulled from the theaters, Over the Edge, Matt Dillon's first song. And this movie had a huge effect on me, right? And in a throwaway scene where a kid is just sitting there combing his hair in front of the mirror while his mom's yelling at him and all this stuff, he's playing Teenage Lobotomy by the Ramones in the background, and that song grabbed me. And I'm like, lobotomy, what is this? And all this stuff. So the Muppets led me to the Ramones. It took me a few years to catch on there, you know, small town and all that stuff. Anyway, back to the rock and roll revolutionary comics. You can get stuff like this. This has Stuart Immonen art. There's another Guns N' Roses. It's an encyclopedia. Rock and Roll Comics presents Encyclopedia Metallica, a collection of the best metal from rock and roll comics. Now, I'm not sure, but the Guns N' Roses section in this is different from the Guns N' Roses #1 there, and this actually has art by Stuart Immonen, who went on to do X-Men and Superman and all that stuff. You know, he ended up becoming a name. You know, so it was really interesting to go through this stuff, right? You know, but being part of that era and stuff. And the only punk that really I could actually find was Metallica's Garage Days. They went back and they did some Misfits songs, and they did Green Hell and some other stuff, because I was like, that's it, that's what I've been looking for, what is that, you know, and all this stuff. And then of course I picked up Dead Kennedys finally and stuff, and you know, tell you what, it was interesting, man. I don't know, they had something to say, but I don't think they ever knew what, you know. But going even further back than Kiss and stuff, like I was talking about with the Beatles popping up in, you know, random books and comics and stuff, you know, you had Robert Crumb pretty much became super famous thanks to doing a comic book album, you know, Cheap Thrills by Big Brother and Holding Company and Janis Joplin and everything. And then that's carried on because, like, I remember, especially in the 80s, Neal Adams did a couple album covers through his Continuity Studios, and sadly, the only one I can remember is at the end of the 80s, near the death of the hair metal bands, was a band called Trickster, and they had got Neal Adams to do their cover. But I'll never forget, it was around the same time I got my classic X-Men #1. I was in Magic Mart, and I went over to see what the cassettes and the music was. I was like 12 or 13. I looked over and I saw this one that said, you know, you had a sheet of glass and it had circles cut out so you could reach in there, but they had these white containers over the cassette so you couldn't pull them out. You could look at them. And I remember it said Surfing with the Alien, and I had to work it and stuff, and I flipped over and about fell down. It was Joe Satriani, and he had a picture of Silver Surfer by John Byrne on the cover. And it was called Surfing with the Alien, and I was sitting there trying to read the songs on it, and I saw one song Surfing with the Alien and stuff. But, you know, music and everything like that. And carrying on, you know, continuing with the punk and stuff, I was really impressed to find out that they were giving John Constantine all these ties, and a lot of this stuff, I guess it's their form of counterculture or alternative lifestyle or something like that. But this 3-issue run of a story with punk rockers in it with John Constantine and stuff. Jason Aaron wrote this, and this was probably the first comic I ever threw down because Jason Aaron just took me too far, and I saw him have an act performed in this by one of the characters that just it was too much, you know. But what was great about this is that there's three kids walking down the road, and you can tell they've been talking about punk music, and one guy's like Clash, Dead Kennedys, and one guy goes Green Day. And I was just like, yeah, this is legit, you know. Okay, what else have I got here? In the 80s, Piranha Press, which at the time I did not know was a DC book. Piranha Press was a short-lived extension of DC Comics there for a while. Now I would love to find a lot of stuff they put out. But anyway, they came out with this Prince, Dennis Cohen drew it and stuff, a Prince comic out of nowhere. And when I saw rock and roll books like this and stuff, they were novelties to me. They were just something to get for, you know, because who has that? You know, who's done that and stuff? Very, very, very strange. Valiant Comics in the early 90s even got on there. They had Aerosmith pop up in the Shadow Man because Shadow Man was a jazz singer, jazz saxophonist and stuff, and you know, he was into the music industry. And it turns out somebody behind the scenes that actually worked Valiant used to be some kind of tour manager or something to do with the other side of the office jobs or something with Aerosmith, so they got permission to put him in the book. Here's what's funny. I think I did read this, but nothing really outstanding happened to it, you know, in it. Okay. And then speaking of jazz and stuff, man, you have people like American Splendor, where Harvey Pekar hung out with Robert Crumb, and Robert Crumb is in a band, and Harvey Pekar actually has written reviews of jazz musicians. Robert Crumb has done trading cards on the history of blues music and stuff, and they're very, very into, you know, they were very into collecting the records and stuff. And Harvey Pekar's, you know, others, you know, he would write about jazz and the records and the things he did, you know, outside of places, doing reviews for him and stuff, and doing history and stuff like that. So that influenced it. Let's see what else is directly in there. Okay. So when we get into the alternative music, you know, it just amazes me because a lot of the bands I liked, and I didn't know it at the time, ended up coming out of CBGBs, right? As I grew older, and you know, you got to remember pre-internet days and stuff. You started putting things together and hearing things. And I remember listening to Talking Heads' Psycho Killer. In the middle of it, he speaks French, and then I heard Blondie singing a song, and she spoke French in it all of a sudden, not Sunday Girl. I don't know. Anyway, but I was like, wait a minute, they're both speaking French, and you found out they both came on CBGB, starting to put it all together and stuff, right? But the punk movement came, Sex Pistols, and everybody, you know, had the punk movement scare everybody to death, so they started labeling it new wave, you know. And out of the new wave came, you know, out of the punk came new wave and goth music and The Cure and Susie and the Banshees and a whole psychedelic furs, and it started getting labeled indie music. Then it was labeled alternative music, you know, as the 80s went on and stuff, right? And one of the books that is highly, highly influenced by that scene, by what's going on, is James OBarr's The Crow, man. I mean, he actually has poems, lyrics by Joy Division, and songs by The Cure like The Hanging Garden in it and stuff, right? He actually based the whole importance of Iggy Pop popping up in the second movie. You can see Iggy drawn in there, you know, as a cameo. It's one pointing its finger. It's because he based Eric Draven's body on the physique of Iggy Pop, and he would listen to these songs and all this alternative music while he was writing this, and you know, it sets a mood. If you look at Brian Boland's stuff, and you know, his great covers and Killing Joke, I just recently found out in the last year or two that he's a avid Frank Zappa fan. So whenever he's drawing, he's got one of his or one or more of his 200 record collection of Frank Zappa playing while he's doing it. I tell you what, man, I got to pick and choose my Zappa, man. Some of his stuff is just, you know, for me, you know. And so, you know, when I read James OBarr's stuff and stuff, man, that 80s alternative music and stuff, I know Joy Division and Cure, New Order, that kind of stuff. It's probably all in this stuff, right? So, you know, that's kind of cool, man. And then you got people who are like, did I bring it up? Yeah. You got people who are fans of music that are fans and stuff, right? Alex Ross. He has cameos of, like, you got to look in the background, but I think he stuck The Who and Led Zeppelin in this somewhere. Seems like there's a few other bands. I would go blank when I'm doing this. But what I loved about this is that he definitely took the Monkees. the Monkees had a TV episode where they were dressed as superheroes, and he kind of stuck them in the background in this. But it also seems like he took the Beatles from the Sgt. Pepper album cover. If he didn't do it in this, he did it in something else, and he stuck them in there in the background. It's one of those little Easter eggs to look for and stuff. And, you know, Alex Ross always has some kind of music playing. He lives in a time bubble. Mostly he's kind of, the comics and music, I guess, should be the way they were when he was a kid, like in the 70s. But, you know, he listens to the Monkees and stuff also when he's drawing and working and stuff. And then you got the guys who are actually musicians that I know of in the comics. It's almost like they're just artists and everything's creative, or some people are doing comics so they can just pay the bills and follow their music and stuff. One big guy is Cadell Keown, who draws the Pit, and he became a superstar on the Hulk. But one of the reasons the Pits took so long to come out in between issues, and it would wouldn't be consistent, is because whenever he got tired of drawing, he'd go there and start working on his music. The way I understood it, you know, we're going on 20-some years memory here, is that basically, okay, I'm gonna go play with my band for a while and stuff. Oh, okay, time to pay some bills. Gonna do a comic. You know, isn't it kind of funny that you have all this talent and just not be a big deal, you know, and all that stuff. Another guy is Tim Truman, man. He's actually formed a band and plays and everything like that in the 80s, and he would actually make these flexi discs. And I've posted about these before and stuff like that. Flexi disc, you know, where he would do songs for the comic. So like with the Prowler here, you know, he did a song that was very 40s influence called Hey Mr. Prowler. Yet if the Prowler was a TV show by, you know, let's say like the Batman 66 show, he did a theme song if it was a TV show and stuck it in there. And the Prowler is a very cruel character and stuff. Then you got guys like Neil Gaiman and Grant Morrison, who were actually there in England during their mod periods, and when you know, the punk movement was hitting there. In July 4th of 1976, the Ramones played England. And from there, and I'm giving you a very Reader's Digest version here, from there you got the Clash and the Sex Pistols and the big punk movement, and they were there. So you have Grant Morrison, who is very influenced by music. He's had characters like Knight and Squire, who's an English version of Batman through Batman Incorporated and stuff. The Squire, the Knight, he wears, you know, a modified Batman mask that looks like a knight in shining armor, but it's got, you know, metal bat ears, and it turns out he listens to the Sex Pistols in his helmet while he's playing. He also made John Lennon, you know, a god in this. When he died and so many people believed in him, he became like god of music or god of rock and roll or something, right? And they spoke to him and stuff. You know, Grant Morrison's heavily influenced. I've seen stuff in his Batman stuff and in other things where he's kind of picked it out of an old punk song and stuck in there, you know, things like that. And like I was talking about the Ramones and stuff like that, you know, and you know, the people who become fans of the Ramones and all this stuff, they came out with a compilation here. I really don't want to take it out, but I'm going to and stuff. But the Ramones fit right in there, man. This is a book, a comic that came with the collected box set of the Weird Tales of the Ramones, and it's full of indie artists, like, and it's got Sergio Aragonis in it and stuff, and 3D comics and just nostalgia and stuff. It's great stuff. Matt Groening and all kinds of people we've never heard of and everything. And it fits in just perfect and everything like that. So basically that's a real brief talk about comics and rock and roll and how they mix. And this is one of those things where I could probably make, you know, 3 or 4 videos and about this, keep talking as I kept digging and keep thinking about it and stuff. My favorite story that I'm going to leave you with is Kirby meeting Paul McCartney, and you know, this is pretty much well known with, you know, Beatles fans and stuff. But Paul McCartney had a song called Magneto versus the Titanium Man, and he was playing a show. I can't remember if it was Vegas or Los Angeles. It was the 70s and stuff. Kirby didn't like Beatles music, all right? He just didn't. But the guy is such a gentleman and stuff that, you know, when he gets, you know, he heard the song and Paul McCartney wanted to meet him and stuff, on the way over there, supposedly, while he was being drove to meet Paul McCartney, who was getting ready to have a show going on and stuff, he drew Paul McCartney and Linda McCartney and the Titanium Man and Magneto in this more realistic style than we usually see in his comics and stuff as a gift for Paul McCartney. And there was rock and roll stars like Frank Zappa, who was buddies with him. I mean, Jack Kirby had fans who were rock stars that hung out with him. Frank Zappa was a big one. I don't know, I think Paul McCartney was just starstruck and stuff like that. But you know, all these guys that make music and stuff, where this was their hero, Jack Kirby and stuff, man. And that's why you can go through and find all kinds of songs that are influenced by, you know, comic books and stuff. You know, I mean, I can think about 5 Superman songs off the top of my head. Well, anyway, that's it. Thanks for sitting through that with me. That was one of those things I just had to get out of my system. Hopefully, there was something interesting in there, right? You guys carry on and, you know, keep rocking and rolling. Is that classic rock, man? We'll turn it up.